Hello everybody, welcome to the live stream. If you haven't attended one of these before, I usually do them every Friday. We have a quick look at some of the major announcements due out next week. Then we'll go through the major markets, indices and currencies, all the usual. And then if there's any stuff you want looking at, if you put it in the chat, then we'll take a look at it then. Quite the night really. This is the S&P that I'm looking at. We had the bombing of Iran from Israel overnight. So a big sell-off. If I make this a 10-minute chart, it's perhaps a bit more dramatic. So that was the moves overnight. So we saw, for example, the S&P closed around the 5,000 mark yesterday. Big sell-off overnight into sort of half three in the morning UK time, and then since then a rally, a recovery back to almost where it was last night, where it closed last night. So loads of volatility. It doesn't change this overall trend that's been in place since April. So we'll take a look at that in a bit more detail when we take a look at that. I'm just making sure this is all working okay, because it seems to... if you're watching, can you just confirm you can hear everything? I don't know if the mic is working properly. I think it is. Anyway, let's carry on. So lots going on in indices. Still weak in April. That's the S&P on the dailies with the spike overnight. If we take a look at the NASDAQ, that was the move in the NASDAQ. So we saw the NASDAQ trade up to, what was it, 18,500 nearly in the third week of March, and it traded down to 17,100 overnight. So quite a bit of volatility. I thought it was surprising that gold didn't push that much higher. We had the move in gold overnight, but it's sold off again and come back to yesterday's lows. But anyway, let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. Let's get the housekeeping done, then we'll jump into it. Thanks for confirming the sound is okay. Risk warning, first of all, this presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, CFDs, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. Okay, what's happening next week? Probably Tuesday and Thursday, I think, are the big days. Tuesday, we've got US manufacturing and services PMI. So, again, are we seeing expansion or contraction in those industries in the US? So that could be an interesting one. Wednesday, we've got Australian inflation data. Not as important, I would say, as US data. But again, we could see some volatility there. And on Thursday, we've got US GDP. So how well or not is the US economy doing? So I think those are Tuesday and Thursday are probably the major announcements due out for next week. Just a quick word from me. I'm working with a new broker this year. If you go to the website, bit.ly/David Trade, the link is in the description down below. The reason I like these, it's a no-frills platform, tight spreads, which is great for shorter term trading. The cost of trading is low, but the link is down below. You can find out more about that. I run a WhatsApp group. I've run this for about 18 months now. In the WhatsApp group, I do a daily update. I'm doing less stuff on YouTube because I'm being a little bit lazy, but I am doing daily updates and sort of chats throughout the day in the WhatsApp group. So there's a daily update, what markets I think are interesting, what trades I'm looking at, markets I'm watching. I mean, today, obviously, there's lots to watch given the volatility overnight, but I do think, for me, it's stock markets today after that overnight reaction. How do we see them trade today? Trades I'm running. So I did a copper trade about a week ago. I'm still in that trade. I'm in the Australian stock market index trade. I got a mix of US stocks, long and short trades. So I talk about those and any questions. If you'd like to try it, you can try it for a month with a 20% discount. If you go to my website, davidjonestrading.co.uk, and use the code YouTube, you can sign up. And again, the link is in the description. That's an example of what it looks like. And I do a newsletter every week. I haven't written it for a few weeks. I will send one out this weekend. If you're not on the list, if you go to the website and put your name in there, your address in there, your email address, in there, you can sign up to the newsletter. So I'll be sending that out this weekend with a bit of an in-depth look, I think, about what is going on in stock markets. Is this the end of the bull run? Let's see. So davidjonestrading.co.uk for all of that sort of stuff. Right, let's have a look at these markets then. Let's see where they're opening. So they're opening pretty much where they closed yesterday at the moment after that volatility overnight. The Dow, I think the Dow is interesting. I'm going to go a little bit off at a tangent here because it's been a really clean trend, the Dow. I always look at the NASDAQ, the S&P, but the Dow has had, I think, the cleanest of trends in this down trend that we've been in since April. And the rallies on the Dow barely threaten the highs of the day before. We had this move on Thursday that did briefly poke through. If I plonk a line on here, briefly poke through. There we go. The high from Tuesday and the high from Wednesday, and then reversed again. And then, of course, we had that dump overnight. I think this would be an interesting level to watch today. Let's call it, what was the high? What was the high on Thursday? 38,084. All right, let's round it up. Let's call it 38,100. I think if the Dow breaks that level, then it starts to look as if finally this downtrend is weakening. But for now, all we've seen all the way down is the market gets slammed when it goes up to here. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture as usual. So let's start off with the S&P. So we've had this run in the S&P since October. I'll put something in here that I shared with the WhatsApp group. I'll just open it up on another screen. The run in the S&P since October traded up to 52.82 in April, beginning of April. And here we are touching 49.20 overnight. I think if we start to lose that overnight low, I think the risk is perhaps for a deeper sell-off. The trend in the S&P, that trend line has been broken. But I think if we looked at that was pretty major support middle of Feb. It was for me anyway. So let's call it 4,900. If we see this market below 4,900. I think the risk is perhaps for a bigger sell-off. It's been quite dramatic. It feels quite dramatic, this sell-off, because it has been fairly relentless. But a bit of perspective, we are only 280 points below the low. So that's about 5%, 5 to 7%, something like that, below the low. It has all happened below the high. Sorry, it has all happened in 1 month. So that's why perhaps it feels a bit more dramatic. But it's interesting to see, is this a pullback or is this the sign of actually something else? But what I shared earlier in the week with the WhatsApp group, I thought it was interesting. I don't know, how much to read into it, but I was looking at the S&P rally this year, and it's been a relatively straightforward run to trade. Okay, so this is since January of this year, and this is a 3% trailing stop, and it shows you how few pullbacks we've had. This is so the market. I think the trailing stop is based on the highest close hit. The market hasn't gone back 3% until recently. Yeah, and then we've had, of course, the move. There we go. So it was that move on the 15th of April, so earlier this week, that finally did pull back more than 3%. And it is a bit unusual. If I go back and look at the rally here, so that was, let's pick up on that bit, late 2020 all the way through 2021. 3% pullbacks were not that unusual. The market did eventually turn around and move higher before, of course, finally topping out in Jan 22. But it has been an odd and quite strong rally, I think we've seen this year in the S&P, which is why I think perhaps for some of us, that sell-off this month has felt just relentless. And it has been. If we have a look at the S&P on the hourlies here, let's just tidy this up a bit. There we go. Again, we've had the odd rally along the way, but it hasn't lasted long, so we've seen quite the shift. So I think it's interesting. It's been a difficult one to call. I've still got a mix of US stocks, long and short. I've given back profit this month, still up overall, but I've given back profit on those, come out of those. Let's see what's moving on the open in those trades. Netflix is down big. I'm in those. I don't know. I think I've got quite a wide stop on those, so I don't think I'll be stopped out of those yet. Netflix is down a lot today. The earnings last night, I think they said in the earnings they're going to stop reporting subscribers numbers going forward from next year. I don't think the market likes that very much. So Netflix, big faller. DXCM, I went short those earlier this week just because they're bumping up near the top of the range. What are the biggest gainers? Nothing that dramatic. MPC, this is Marathon Petroleum. This is one of my biggest winners for the year so far. Anyway, not a lot going on there as of yet. Markets have just opened. Let's go back and take a look at some of these markets. So for the S&P, interesting to see how it finishes today. We've seen a 80 point fall overnight. We've seen the bounce back. What happens next? Let's see what happens, and can we see actually a positive close for the S&P today? Similar moves in the Nasdaq, obviously. We've had this run in the Nasdaq now that's been going since 2023. If we picked up on that trend, it looks something like that. We're well above the trend. The trend line comes in. If we're looking at that, about 1,000 points lower than where the market's trading now. But again, for the Nasdaq, these lows for me from the end of January, around about 17,100, were important. They have held overnight. Let's see what happens for the rest of the session. But again, the Nasdaq peaked third week of March around about just below 18,500, and here we are, 1,200 points lower. So a bigger sell-off in the Nasdaq. And then the Dow, which has slightly overperformed, I think, the Nasdaq and the S&P in terms of the strength we see. And I think so I'm watching this one now more than I have done in the past. Interesting to see if the big stocks that made up the Dow, because there's only 30 stocks, the Dow, do they perhaps lead some of the turn? But let's see. Let's not get too excited about the markets turning around until we see, at least, some of the highs broken from here. Okay, it's a dramatic move overnight, big bounce back. Does this mark the beginning of a turnaround in markets' fortunes? Let's see where they finish today. So personally, I'm not in too much of a hurry to do anything today, but some quite dramatic moves in there. The Russell, I was looking at this beginning of the month. This is the smaller cap US index, the Russell 2000. And it's just been, we've been sideways for a long time. Started breaking out in December last year, broke out again, and it's just pulled all the way back into the range. So again, I think if the bigger markets, the bigger indices do start to show a turnaround, perhaps we'll see something of a turnaround in the Russell smaller cap as well. Let's see. But that has pulled right back into the range. I think that's interesting for me. I would be looking to buy a pullback when the pullback stops pulling back. And I'd want my stop probably the other side of 1880. So again, not one for today, but an interesting one if we see some of these markets start to turn around. The Nikkei has, again, had a really good run this year. Started rolling over the third week of March, has come back to, what could be the trend since October last year. Another interesting one. I think so much does depend on how these markets finish today. So let's see. The DAX had been, the German market had been stable over the last few days. Again, of course, the big move overnight, and it's bounced back to where it was at yesterday's close. Let's see what happens in US markets. The FTSE, as ever, sort of doing its own thing. The FTSE, it's interesting. The FTSE did trade up in mid-April to pretty much the old all-time high from Feb last year, and has run out of steam. I'm not too interested in the FTSE at the moment up here, but it's interesting that just above 8,000 we saw the sellers come back in again. The Italian index, the Italy 40, has had a great run, and again, in common with these other markets, started to roll over at the end of March. I think this is an interesting market because this run has been, pretty much a straight line run since the end of January. It's corrected from about 35,000 down to just above 33. And again, had been stronger than US markets earlier this week. So maybe if we get some strength in the Italian market, we see this downtrend for April broken. So that's the Italian 40. So the likes of the DAX and the Italian market definitely have been, I think, stronger, relatively speaking, than the S&P and the Nasdaq in recent weeks. Although, of course, they have still been sliding as well. The Hong Kong market, textbook, back to the downtrend in April, second week of April, and has slid a bit lower since then. So the downtrend for the Hang Seng index is still down. We have these old lows from November 22, around about 14,600. Let's see what happens. But again, for me, not in too much of a hurry to do anything really there. And the Nifty 50, the Indian index, hit a fresh all-time high just about a week and a half ago. Has pulling back, but again, the trend is still up on the Nifty. So I think that, that's an interesting market, with support down at 21,000. There's the big trend that has been chugging along now since March 2020. So the Nifty, the Indian index, has, what's it done? Tripled since those lows, and a bit more since the COVID lows in March 2020. And for me, that's a market that's still going higher. So and the Aussie index. So I've got a trade on the Aussie index. I thought it was interesting, the Aussie index, that we looked at it before. That we had the highs from August 21, 22, April 22, Feb 23, and then recently started breaking out, and of course has been put under some pressure by what's going on with other indices over the last month. But for me, that's still an interesting market. I've got my stop. I think it must be the others. It's down here at 7,400. My stop on the Aussie. So still a bit of distance to go on that. Let's see if markets start to turn around. Then of course we'll see these other global markets start to get a move on. So yeah. So that's it. So stock markets still under pressure. Interesting to watch today what happens. For me, I would be watching the highs from yesterday. Okay, because like I said, markets such as the S&P have not been able to break the previous day's highs for some time. I did go short on Monday. Was it Monday? I went short. Yeah, Monday. So I did go short on Monday and came out of it around about here. So I did okay, but missed the last bit of the move, so far down here. And of course, the flip side is look to go short. If we see this market run up to the highs of yesterday, that's an interesting area to go short. The Nasdaq's already turning. The Dow is still strong. So I think a really interesting afternoon on these markets, and I'm in no hurry to do too much, but interesting to see what happens if they do push back near yesterday's highs. So that's stock markets. Trend still down over the last month. No change there. Some dramatic moves overnight. Let's see what happens today. If we take a look at some of the other markets, the dollar index, the trend in the dollar index is still up for the year so far. This is where we are. Perhaps it's a bit overextended in the short term, but I would absolutely buy a dip in the dollar index, a bigger dip. From a short term point of view, these lows, even from yesterday, around about 105.70, had been some support. Let's see what happens this afternoon. I'd rather buy a deeper dip. Going back to the dailies, that's what our trend looks like. So even a 200-point slide from here, that market is still in the uptrend, and 200 points is only where it was a couple of weeks ago. So let's see. With that US data out next week, we could well see some volatility in the US dollar. So we'll see what happens with that one. But with these other markets, like pound against the dollar, it has started breaking down. I've been saying that I've not done much in FX this year because these markets have been sideways. This is pound against the dollar. You can see how sideways it's been since December. Started breaking down over the last week or so. So again, You know, if we were going to view this as a false break, then for me, on pound against the dollar, I would want to be a seller of strength. You know, if we got a bit of a rally, if we did have some US dollar weakness, I'd want to be a seller of strength in the likes of pound against the dollar. Let's see what happens there. Similar picture with the euro. There we go. There's euro against the US dollar. Again, pretty sideways since mid-November. Broke below that. We had new lows for the year. So again, if I was doing anything, I'd want to be a seller at the moment of euro against the dollar. So yeah. So still, perhaps not too exciting for me. Still, FX markets, but that's where we are. If we take a look at gold and silver. So gold, in this great trend in gold since October last year, busted out through the all-time highs. We had that odd move in December, moves a bit sideways, and then breaks out again in March. And this market really has rocketed away. You know, we can't deny the bullish sentiment in gold. Like I say, it's perhaps a bit surprising that we've not seen that much progress over the last week or so, given what's been going on in the world. So perhaps it's getting, in the short term, a little bit tired up here. It has had a big move, you know, since the last couple of months. The price of gold is up almost 20%. You know, that is a big move. It's put on $400 nearly since the middle of February. So perhaps we are overdue a correction. But I would absolutely, for now, be a buyer of the dip in gold. You know, some shorter term levels to watch. I think, you know, 2300 to 2320 has been good support for gold. There's the 2300 level. And you can see over the last couple of weeks, whenever we've seen rallies back towards 2320, the buyers have come back out. So even though we've not seen that much in the way of progress over the last week, you know, we've still got some definite support down below where we are now. But an interesting one, and trend is still up. I'd be a buyer of the dip. In silver, I mean, big moves in silver. It took a while to get going. You know, it was early April when it really started, and gold, again, had been moving higher a bit before that. And silver has traded up near the old levels that it just cannot get through, or hasn't been able to get through for nearly 4 years. You know, $30 an ounce really has been the graveyard for the bulls in silver. Is this time going to be any different? So far it's not. You know, we saw it trade up almost bang on 30. We're going to get 29.79 the 12th of April. So an interesting one. You know, I'd say the trend for the last 4.5 years in silver has been pretty sideways. It's a wide sideways range, but it is pretty sideways. So I think if silver starts to break 30, it starts to look a bit more interesting. I think when was that time it ran up to 80? I think we've got to go back. There we go. Oh, it wasn't 80. I'm imagining it. It ran up to 50. And that was back in 2011. We saw silver up at $50 an ounce. You know, I think maybe if it breaks 30 this time round, it starts to look a bit more interesting. But it's not showing, at the moment at least, any signs of breaking 30 just yet. So let's see. Copper, I mentioned I'm in the trade in copper. Copper, I bought into the trend in copper. Has broken out to, over the last couple of days, to its best levels in about, 20 months or so. It had been a pretty boring market for a while. But, you know, I'm in the trend. Let's see what happens on copper. $4.85 had been a big problem in the past. Let's see how high this run in copper might go. You know, like I say, I'm long at the moment with a trailing stop. I bought in, I think it was a week last Monday, so it would have been back here somewhere, 425, something like that. I think it was. Anyway, so yeah, and the trend is still up, so I'm happy to stick with that for now, and a big break there. Crude oil. This was interesting. I mean, we had, not surprising, massive volatility overnight. So the price of oil went from about below 83 to almost 86.5 overnight, and here we are, all the way back again. I think if you looked at it, you know, over the last couple of weeks or so, it's a bit sideways to down, but overall the trend for oil is up. You know, if we go back to December of last year, we're still in that uptrend for oil, so I'd still be a buyer of the dips. There's an argument to be a buyer today. You know, we've had this old support from March, third week of March, down around ahead of $80.50. Is that going to hold? I think it'll be an interesting week next week for oil. I'd rather wait for today to be out of the way and see where it finishes. But you know, that big trend for oil since the end of last year is still up for me. So interesting to see what happens there. Natural gas. Oh, the crazy market that is natural gas. The old lows have held. The lows from mid-Feb down around 156. They've held again, but nothing too exciting since then. We have seen the price bounce back, but let's see. And these were the lowest since, well, you have to go back to June 2020. So these are almost 4-year lows. Let's see if natural gas makes the base down here. Cocoa, constant favourite in the WhatsApp group. This one, the trend in cocoa continues. New all-time highs again today. So cocoa briefly traded above 12,000 today. I mean, it's a phenomenal run, you know, considering it was 4,000 just in January. So in less than 4 months, we've seen the price of cocoa triple, and continuing a trend that was in place. So if we go back to here, what was it? October 22, it was 2.3, and here we are at 12. So up fivefold since then. An amazing trend in cocoa. I mean, clearly it has all gone a bit exponential, hasn't it? But can't really argue with that trend for now. So let's see. Always an interesting market to watch that one, the price of cocoa. Is there anything else in commodities moving? I mean, coffee has had the move. Coffee, this one is coffee Arabica. That's coffee Robusta. You know, so again, coffee's been on quite the rip as well. Some volatility there. And I think they're the two that are perhaps the most interesting. Sugar, I was looking at that today. I was expecting, I traded sugar a bit in the past on the way up early last year. Not traded it since then, I don't think. I thought it was interesting that sugar, you know, has been really weak, coming off these multi-year highs, maybe all-time highs, and so far has held above the 2023 lows. So the 2023s for sugar lows were around about 19, and it has held so far. So not too much urgency to do anything there, but an interesting market. And another one we looked in the group today was nickel. Someone brought it up. So the price of nickel had been in this big downtrend, had halved from Jan 23 into November 23, and just wondering, is it starting to turn around? You know, we've seen the break out of the downtrend and a recovery and new highs for the year today in nickel. So maybe that's an interesting market to watch next week. And finally, let's do Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has been a bit boring during March and April. You know, we do have these old lows around about 59,000 have held again overnight. You know, it was a fairly important low in early March. And even though we've been a bit sideways, 59,000 has held the market up. So again, if I wanted to be a buyer of Bitcoin, I would have stops at least the other side of 59,000. You know, the trend for Bitcoin is undeniably up, and that's where we are, even though it's all been a bit sideways. What about Ethereum? We haven't looked at that for a while, have we? Ethereum, USD, what's that look like? Oh, it's sort of drifted back to the downtrend, the uptrend, I should say. So again, if I was a buyer of Ethereum, I think probably the closest I have my stop at the moment, perhaps the other side of, I don't know, 2.7, 2.6, something like that. That's come off quite a bit, hasn't it, from the highs? So the highs were 4.1, and it's been down as far as 3,000, so it's dropped 30%-ish. Interesting. Let's see. Let's see what happens with that, whether we see the buyers come back in on this trend. So for me, the most interesting markets to watch are still stock markets going into next week. You know, we've had these downtrends in April. That's the S&P. That's the old NASDAQ. And that is the Dow Jones. It's fairly persistent downtrends all the way through April. Is it correction? Is it the start of the next bear market? Let's see. Let's see what happens. Interesting to see where it all finishes today. I think, you know, a positive would be if they manage to break through the highs of the day before, because we're not seeing that at the moment. So for now, you know, arguably good place to go short the Dow up here. You know, we have the highs from Tuesday, at around about 38,000 and a bit. The highs from yesterday, just below 38.1. So going short with a couple of 100-point stop loss and a bit more maybe. Could be an interesting one, particularly if it retraces all that move from yesterday. That's about 700 points back to the lows of yesterday. The overnight lows, I should say. Let's see what happens. But interesting markets, I think, up at these levels, particularly that Dow Jones. So I think that's the market I'll be watching for the rest of today, and we'll see what happens going into next week. And oil is interesting as well, you know, because the trend is still up. We've had a lot of volatility. What happens with the trend down here? So we'll see what happens. So I'll have a look at the stuff you want looking at now. But don't forget, if you want to try out the WhatsApp group, use the code YouTube. Go to the website, David Jones Trading. .co.uk, and if you go to subscribe, I think the link is in the description. You can join the WhatsApp group, use the voucher, and you'll get a 20% discount off the first month subscription to try it out and see what you think. Okay, so that's it. All the links are in the description of the video. Okay, let's take a look at some of the stuff you want looking at. NIO. Have we looked at NIO recently? No. The old electric car company, isn't it? Chinese electric cars. Oof, they're still getting hit, aren't they? We clearly looked at those. The last time we looked at it, I think would have been pre-January 2024, because I had my support line in there, and that support has gone. And since then, they've not quite halved, but they've dropped about $3 since then. So for me, I mean, that is pretty amazing, isn't it? They're clearly not doing something right. So, you know, the trend is down from Jan 21, 3 years ago. They were $66. Here we are below 4. I would still, you know, I would not be a buyer. I'd still be looking to go short and expect the rallies to run out of steam. So yeah, what's going on with them lately? Let's have a look. I've not seen. You hear a lot more about these Chinese electrical vehicle manufacturers now, don't they? Because of in the UK more, like well, MG obviously is Chinese owned, isn't it? And BYD, Build Your Dream. I see a lot of press about those. Don't see that much about NIO. Maybe, I mean, I don't think they're clearly in the UK market, are they? And that's the one that does the battery swap, isn't it? So rather than driving in and charging up, you drive in and it swaps the battery out automatically. Anyway, not going so well at the moment. Trend's still down. Yeah, so for me, I'd be a seller of rallies, I think, in the old NIO. Intel broke a big level, didn't they? Oof, and continues. I think that's interesting. Not one for today, for me, but I mean, that's a pretty straight line sell-off, isn't it? When it broke that old support. So what have we got? We do have, you know, a trend since March of last year. So we're a year into this trend on Intel. It hit $52, no, 51 in late December, and it's been downhill since then. It's lost, what's that, about 30% since then. So I think it's interesting going into next week, because we do have the trend line and the old lows around $31, $32. So that for me would be one to watch. That would be for me, if markets turned around, a bit of a recovery one, perhaps. Let's see. But I'd be a buyer of the dip just when the dip stops, and it's still dipping at the moment. You know, it's been, as we can see from the indices, you know, fairly relentless sell-off, hasn't it? So for me, I think it's a really interesting one to watch. Not one for just yet, though, for me. And TRV, what's that? Travelers. Is that banks, credit cards, something like that? That's interesting. I do like these overreaction to earnings type moves. I would buy that. There we go. So what happened on the earnings? So it was a negative surprise. So the estimate was 4.92. The market was expecting, the estimate was 4.92. That's what the market was expecting. And they came in at 469. I would buy it. So I do on stocks. I'd like doing occasionally, has the market overreacted to something? And earnings is the classic example. So for me, if I was a buyer now, I would put, the closest I put my stop is that low on earnings to the other side of 202. So I think that's interesting. Traveller. So yeah, there you go. And it's quite interesting. They have bucked the market the last couple of days. Obviously, if the market's been selling off, these have been recovering. So there does seem to be the view that perhaps it has overreacted. And if I was looking for a recovery, I'd be looking to see if they can get back to 230 from where they are now. So that's an interesting one. Boeing. What's going on with those? They're still dropping, aren't they? Yeah, after there was that initial thing, wasn't there, about the door flying off, wasn't it? That was a few months ago, wasn't it? Back in early January. And I think I've seen the odd bits of more quality control problems, I think, since then. And there's a whistleblower story at the moment, isn't there? There's a whistleblower claims, there we go, claims 787 Dreamliner planes are defective. So that was news from yesterday. It was Sky News from yesterday and also in the FT. So interesting though, the share price isn't going down. So the whistleblower has come out and the share price hasn't really gone down. So you could take the contrarian view here that has all of the bad news being priced into Boeing. I mean, I don't know. I'd rather be a bit more patient. I mean, the stock price has dropped by $100 since December. So it's about 40% drop almost since December. So perhaps, an aggressive trade could be. All the bad news is priced in. I'd probably rather be a little bit more patient, but and I want to stop probably the other side of 160 if I was a bottom fisher down here. It's interesting, isn't it? Let's come back to it and see where it's trading. But I think that's interesting that there's all this whistleblower news has come out and the stock price hasn't slid. So let's see. Coinbase. I'm going to guess they've been boring because crypto's been a bit sideways, but let's see. Yeah, they've been a bit boring over the last few weeks. Obviously benefited from the rise in some of the cryptos. What would you do? I don't know. I'd rather buy it than sell it, I think, going with the trend over the last whatever it is. I don't know. But where would you put your stop? I mean, if I had to trade it today, I'd probably put my stop the other side of 190 or something. So yeah, I'd be a buyer rather than a seller, but I'd probably rather be a bit patient as well. They've got earnings coming out soon. They might be interesting, mightn't they? 2nd of May. So let's see. Let's see what they look like. Newmont. They always underperform, don't they, these gold miners? So let's have a look. I would go short. I think we looked at those a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? I go short Newmont. The trend is still down since whenever it is, Jan 23. So I would go short and I'd want to put a stop above 43. So I think I did mention last time around this old low. It's a big old low from November 2018. So it's a 5.5 year low, isn't it? So for me, though, I'd still be looking to go short and see does it go back and retest the low. You could take the view, well, look, if they're going to turn around anywhere, this is the place, then fair enough. And we have seen that low hold in Feb. But for me, I'd still be leaning with the trend rather than doing anything else at the moment. Amazon, I'm in Amazon. Amazon, the trend is up. They had the briefest of pokes to all-time highs. So I'm in that. That was one of the first trades I did in my current stock trading. I've been in them since about the 18th of December. I got a trailing stop on it. I would buy the dip. I wouldn't buy it yet though because it's still dipping. And I'd want to stop probably at least the other side of 166. Tesla's interesting, isn't it? Tesla is weak, isn't it? It's broken through a 12-month low. And yeah, so I'd rather sell a rally in Tesla. I think it's interesting. The lows from January 2023 was where we saw the base for the big spring higher, wasn't it? So let's call it $100. So I think it's interesting if it starts edging much lower to there. But for now, the trend is most definitely down, isn't it, in the old Tesla? So yeah, that's that. Ford. Is that? Oh, hang on, that's a funny listing. Ford Motor Company, New York. There we go. It's a bit. I mean, it's a bit sideways and boring, isn't it? Over the last 1.5 years, I would buy it though. If I had to do anything, I would buy it because I think we do have a recovery going on. You know, since November. You know, it has been recovering. It's sort of fallen out of the downtrend, but we've still got higher uptrend and we've still got higher highs and higher lows. I would buy it with a stop at least the other side of $11.50. So let's see. Meta. Meta, is that still zooming higher? I would have to buy it all the time. I mean, that comeback in Meta is amazing, isn't it? So this, of course, is the old Facebook. So we have... So it traded up in 2021, traded up to 382, fell down to below $100, and then bang, here we are, trading around 500. Amazing, amazing. So for me, I'd be a buyer. The only question is, where does your stop go? I would want my stop. We saw it gap higher on earnings in Feb. If I was a buyer now, I would want my stop at least the other side of that earnings thingy. Low. I mean, it did, you know, it made an all-time high just a couple of weeks ago. Again, so, you know, it's still got the momentum, clearly. So, let's see. And now, what's NOW? NOW, Service Now. I mean, I'd buy that as well. But again, not today, but, you know, we've got breakout, all-time highs in Feb. It's all been a bit sideways since then. So for me, I would buy. I mean, you could absolutely, if you thought, oh, this thing is overcooked, you've got a logical level to place your stop at. If you think it's, you know, a false breakout and it's going to sell off, then I'd go short with a stop above 800, 815. But for me, I'd buy the dip, but not yet. And I'd want to stop. The other side is 670 at the moment because the trend is still up. So this is Service Now. So I think that's... It's certainly interesting, isn't it? So, yeah, let's see. But, you know, with markets still selling, these markets have turned again a little bit. So that's the S&P. Oh, it's just sort of holding. What's the Dow doing? The Dow is still trying to do it. Okay. What else? DraftKings, DKNG, burn your dwelling. DraftKings, is that a betting site, isn't it, or something to do with betting, isn't it, something like that? Oh wow, that is a nice trend, isn't it? Let me just check. It is the right one, isn't it? DraftKings, sports betting company. Yeah, that is my sort of trend, that one. So what would you do with that? So I wouldn't buy them yet, but I might buy them next week. The closest I would have my stop would be at least the other side of 40. I'd probably go a bit further than that though, and go perhaps the other side of 35. But that's been a really good trend, hasn't it? Since Jan 23, when they were $12 or thereabouts, and here we are at 42. Still a way off their all-time highs, up at 74. But what a great trend that's been for DraftKings. So yeah, I would be a buy the dip on that one. Let's have a look. What else? I've lost my place. AJG. I was going to buy these. I was in these. I've come out of them, and I'm going to buy them back in. So let me just try and tidy all this up. So Arthur J. Gallagher. You could also say, though, it's a short. Oh, actually, it isn't. It isn't a short if you look at that, is it? I mean, that's the trend going back to May 2020. So I bought into them, I think in here somewhere. And I came out of them on the way. I did think when it broke out it was going to take off again, and clearly it hasn't. So is this sort of 250, 260, a real barrier for Arthur J. Gallagher? I don't know. They've sold off a lot. I would buy it if I was a buyer. I would still want my stop the other side of 220. So what I would be looking to do is buy in now, and do we get a breakout this time around? Let's see what happens. But I think that's an interesting one, Arthur J. Gallagher. And that's it, I think. We're done. If that's all the questions, we are done. So for me, I will be watching US markets this afternoon. S&P is a little bit on the turn. NASDAQ is already turned. Dow is still green for the hour. Let's see what happens. You know, this is the pattern we've seen all the way down. We might get a bit of a push up, but it doesn't last long. So is today going to be any different? I think it should make for an interesting rest of the session in the US. You know, but you know, for now, the trend in these markets absolutely still down. Where does it stop? Nobody knows. But for me, I think it'd be interesting to see where it all finishes today for these markets. And I think if we do see, I mean, that overnight low is a bit of an arbitrary one because it did happen at sort of 3:30, whenever it was this morning. But I think, you know, if we see these markets continue to push lower, and particularly if that 49.20 gets taken out on the S&P, I think the risk is for a much bigger sell-off. So let's see. But I'll do it all again, of course, next Friday, I think. If you want updates throughout the week, go to the website, join the WhatsApp group, try it out for a month, use the code YouTube. You get regular updates throughout the week and throughout the day from me on the website. I'll send out a newsletter, I think, this weekend. But otherwise, we'll wrap things up there. So good luck with your trading. Thanks for coming along and see you next week.